And we owe a big thank you to the Whisky Exchange for this tasting, to Abby, who's done a lot of the organisation, and especially to Dawn, who's going to give the tasting, explain as we go along with what these 6 vermouths are all about. Vermouth is obviously a topical subject at the moment, lots of interest. And in Dawn, we've got a super person to tell us about it. She's got a very broad experience from drinking wine with water as a young child and carrying on all the way through. I hope everybody's read the Meet the Friend article about her recently that Amanda published in the Circular, but a couple of other little bits of biography information for those who haven't. Dawn's was a sommelier first, head sommelier at very distinguished restaurants, Zuma, Boxwood, the Ledbury. Then she moved to be head buyer at Selfridges, won some awards, did very well there. And in 2015, she became an MW. And that year also, she moved to the Whisky Exchange, where she is head of buying. And she's had a really busy time during lockdown, increasing particularly the wine range and organising a lot of online sessions. And so she is going to tell us all about Vermouth. Over to you, Dawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to see a few familiar faces that I haven't seen for far too long, and I can't wait to be in a room with you guys, tasting some wine and having a hug. So absolutely wonderful to be here today. Apologies if I do get confused along the way, because literally today I have been doing pre-records for Cognac Show, which is coming up at the end of the month. I've been doing some stuff on Rum Show, which is coming up in July, and so I'm pretty much totally confused by what spirit and what category and where I am right now. But yeah, you know, I think I was really keen to do is one of the things that I've always been super passionate about in my life, and those of you who know me will know I'm a slightly crazy, very energetic, and have really random ideas and go off on tangents on things. But I'm hugely passionate about quality of liquid, as we all are. You know, all of you here today would never have joined wine if you didn't love great liquid. But one of the biggest problems I have, both from a point of a bartender or a spirits lover, and the wine, sort of the restaurant community and things like that, is that as a sommelier, you pay so much attention to the wine. And I have so many times walked into an amazing restaurant, some of the best restaurants in the world, and had the worst spirits list put in front of me ever. And the reverse is true. You know, I can walk into some of the best bars in the world and have the most amazing cocktails, the best spirits, and have the worst glass of wine or champagne I've ever come across in the planet. So the one thing I was really passionate about all my life, or for the last sort of probably 10 years since I've kind of done that sort of half and half, I've got a foot in wine, I've got a foot in spirits, is I want to bring these two worlds together, because I just can't believe that anyone who doesn't like good liquid or good food can never, ever like good spirits or whatever. And actually Vermouth seemed like a really nice place to start, because it, like me, has its foot in both camps. My passion will always be wine. I love wine to the depth of my soul. But spirits are so exciting, and there's so much happening. It's such a vibrant industry. And I think what I kind of want to kind of say is that the spirits category or the spirits industry can show the wine industry so much, and vice versa. So I thought Vermouth was a really, really lovely place to start. And, you know, please feel free to ask me questions. If I can't answer, I've got Wikipedia, or Becky Sue, who has written a book, so who's probably going to have so much more knowledge than me. I just have passion. That's about it. And, you know, please ask away. Where I can answer, I'll answer. And I want to kind of throw in what's happening in the world of Vermouth at the moment, because I actually do really, really believe that Vermouth is on an upward trajectory. Just to share with you some volumes, and, you know, to talk to you about kind of where I think Vermouth is right now. So lockdown, we saw something really incredible happen. As all of you have read and heard, retail went crazy. people started making cocktails at home. And one of the most fascinating things, and I was a social anthropologist by my university degree. And I wish I could have done my MW dissertation this year, because it would have been so much more easy, because there was so much to write about that was happening online. And I was watching what people were making at home. It was the most fascinating thing in the world. So when lockdown happened, people went to what they knew, what was safe. Famous graphs, buck-fast, one per person. I mean, it was insane, it was crazy. And then suddenly people started experimenting. And suddenly I was like, why am I selling so much Campari and Rosso Vermouth? Oh, they're making Negronis. And then they started making Manhattans. And then they started making old fashions, and then daiquiris, and then pina coladas. And I could actually plot it week by week at what people were doing. And what it's meant is that so many people are now making cocktails at home. And if you think about it, you buy a bottle of vermouth, most people before would have been like, well, I've got this bottle of vermouth, I'm probably going to make a Negroni, and then it's just going to die quietly in my fridge. And in the wine industry, we know that sherry has similar problems to this. And luckily, we're changing the tide on that. And I think actually vermouth is in a very similar position to sherry. It's kind of that product that you buy for one thing, and then you just don't really know what to do with, you know. So, and I think it's kind of like now people are like, okay, well, I can buy a bottle of vermouth and then I can do a martini with it. I can make a risotto with it. And I think people are getting so much more confident. And I'm so excited about our new post-COVID consumer, because I really do believe they're so much more adventurous. They really have learned a lot over lockdown. And we're going to be talking to a very educated consumer coming out of this. And I am so excited to talk to them. But just to give you an idea, over the last year, my volumes of vermouth have gone up by 132%. The value has gone up 129%. And honestly, if I strip out those COVID numbers, which I roughly know what my growth was overall and how COVID impacted my growth online, I actually still believe I'm probably looking at about a 20% natural increase in vermouth sales, which shows a good trend. And what is amazing is that, you know, like how I think people are definitely not just going. So in the beginning, they were buying martini. They were buying those kind of classics, those cinzanas and things like that. But actually what I saw towards the kind of second half of lockdown, where people were going and trying new vermouths, Cocchi di Torino, insane sales for me online. Other brands like Regal Rogue and some of the ones we have in front of us today, all of those saw growth. And I think people were getting really, really excited. And Becky Sue, absolutely. You know, in terms of how you keep vermouth, we'll definitely talk about serving vermouth and keeping vermouth and what to do with your sort of leftover bit of vermouth. And as we go through, I'll probably bring it in when I talk about Cocchi, because Roberto Bava, who is Mr. Cocchi, is the most wonderful man in the universe, and had some really funny things to say about how kind of the culture of vermouth has changed, even from the producer's perspective. So vermouth, an amazing history, actually. So they actually believe the first kind of, in brackets, vermouths that were ever sort of come into being. And like gin, you know, and like a lot of alcohol, it all started off, as you know, as medicinal. For health, you know, we look at wormwood, it's good for things like rheumatoid arthritis, stomach digestion, and lots of kind of medicinal properties, as well as along with all the botanicals that go in there. And actually they believe that they sort of only discovered, I think it was about 10 years ago, that they actually discovered the first kind of recording of a vermouth style was the Chang dynasty. And that's 1550, I think it was, BC. So, you know, we're talking a hell of a long time ago. And that was, they found a Chang wine, which had wormwood in it. And as we kind of look at the history, it follows a very sort of similar trend in terms of how we see a lot of spirits kind of migrating across into Europe, and very, very much went into India. The Ayurvedic culture used to use it quite a lot. Hippocrates in 400 BC was already writing about these kind of wormwood drinks that were helping digestion and things like that. And of course, got to love the Romans. I mean, we have to thank the Romans for so much of our drinking history. And of course, they were very much a part of it. Pliny the Elder was definitely writing about wormwood back then. And, you know, as it went through the Greeks into kind of what I would call modern day vermouth. And, you know, always with things like this, it gradually turns into something where it becomes not just a medicinal thing, but a drink for pleasure. And we very much started to see that sort of in the times of the Romans, but really it was sort of the 1500s, around the center of Torino, Turin, and the Duchy of Savoy, that we really began to see what we now recognize as modern day vermouths. And this was purely because if you think of Turin, it was the center of kind of that spice route, all those beautiful herbs and spices coming through from Asia and all over the world. They had wine, you know, we think of course of Piemonte and all that region, and the Duchy of Savoy, of course, Savoy, sorry, was a big duchy, you know, it stretched from Turin all the way up to Chambéry. And if we think of the two real capitals of vermouth in the world, even to this day, it is, of course, the two that have the appellations that are protected regions of origins, which is, of course, Vermouth de Torino and Vermouth de Chambéry. So, you know, that those two still have very much sort of stayed as the center of vermouth. And I think what I'm super excited about is how that history is starting to progress and span out, and how we're seeing loads of different vermouths now popping up across the world. And, you know, and I think for wine people, it's actually a natural thing. You know, if you're a winemaker, it's natural. Why would you not make vermouth? And I think what we kind of have in our heads, and it's maybe similar to kind of how we remember sherry, and I'm going back to sort of the point earlier, you know, when we think of sherry, we used to think of it as our grandmother's drink, Harvey's Bristol Cream. Today, we see it as this vibrant, amazing product. And vermouth, again, I think it was always slightly tarnished with that sort of dusty bottle of Martini Rosso that was kind of sitting on your grandmother's shelf, that you just kind of, even like to this day, if I walk sometimes into sort of Sainsbury's or something, and you're like, I'd like a bottle of vermouth, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh no, let's not touch that. There's like about an inch of dust on it. And I think people were definitely not treating vermouth in the way it should be treated. So I have a rule when I go into restaurants, and I love Negronis. It's one of my favorite drinks in the world. I love vermouth and tonic. My rule is, if I go up to the bar, I will never order anything with vermouth at a table. I have to be able to see the bottle of vermouth. And I'll go up to a bar, and I won't name the restaurant I was in, but it was a very, very good restaurant. And I said, can I have a vermouth and tonic, white vermouth and tonic? And they picked the bottle off the back bar, nicely lit up, nice and hot, and delicious. Had about half of it gone, and they poured it. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that should not be that color. And you know, what the wonderful Roberto Bava said to me was that when he sort of started talking about vermouth about 10 years ago, people used to say to him, how long should you keep it? And he'd be like, 3 months, because, you know, he was used to people keeping it like 6-7 months on a shelf. And as he kind of sort of got more confident about sort of talking about vermouth and the quality of vermouths and his products, he sort of gradually moved that number back down to now, you know, for a sort of white vermouth, literally probably 4 weeks in a fridge. And of course, everything should be kept in a fridge once opened. It is absolutely no different to any sherry. And that's the way to kind of think about it. Because even though there's a slightly higher alcohol, and we'll talk about the production of vermouth in a minute, that's still not enough to protect it, in the same way as there's not enough to protect like a Fino sherry, if we're looking at that, similar ABVs. And a Rosso vermouth, which has a little bit more oxidation in the same way as an Oloroso sherry does, that you could probably stretch to about 6 weeks, but again in the fridge. And what we're now seeing, and I remember sort of tasting my first vermouth, and it must have been when I opened Zuma, and the bartender gave me this thing, and I had only just started in wine. I had no clue what I was doing. Still amazed that I have actually managed to pass my MW to this day. Total fluke. And it, you know, I sat there and I tasted this thing and I was like, not sure about this. There was something I really liked about it, but what I felt was that the quality of the grapes in that bottle was not good. And I think this is where vermouth has become hugely exciting. And I think this is probably a really good place to start. So what is vermouth? Vermouth is a product that is an aromatized wine defined by EU law that has to have wormwood in it. So there are other things that are very similar, like Americanos, like Quinay Lillet, things like that. They are made in the same way. They are an aromatized wine, but they are not vermouth because they do not have that major component of wormwood. Now, it used to be that you could only use about 2 or 3 different types of wormwood. Now it can be anything from the Artemisia family, which means there are over 400 types of wormwood. The ones that are used the most are the Roman wormwood, and then the classic grand wormwood. Those are the 2 that seem to be most used to this day. So in terms of kind of how the name wormwood came about, they believe it was after the German word for wormwood, which is Vermouth. And they said it was actually Campano. Campano was probably the first, Carpano, sorry, was the first company or guy to actually really make vermouth in Genoa. And they do believe, and there is no firm evidence on this, that he named it Vermouth Vermouth to appeal to the Duchy of Savoy, which of course had ties to the German family. So they believe that that's where the name came from, although there is no fixed evidence that that is true. But you know, if you look at that sort of center of production, and really the first vermouth came onto the market in 1786 by Carpano. You now see those families, and actually it was very much just sort of around the center of Torino, where vermouth was produced. Martini I Rossi, of course, were one of the famous family. Chazelet, of course, another famous family. There were so many famous families. Then you had up in France the Noy Prats. You had your kind of non-vermouth characters like your Dubonnets and things. But you know, there was this whole kind of sort of, I guess, this love of this product. Even in England, they were making sort of Isles, which were these apparently horrible vermouth style things. They actually started going into putting more sort of wormwood into beers actually in England, which was quite interesting. And even in Hamlet, when Ophelia dies, they mention this Isle as being as bad as a crocodile tail. So yeah, I think in the UK, we didn't quite get the hang of vermouth until probably the last 10 years, is my honest feeling. So vermouth, as I said, it has to have wormwood in it. It has to be 75% grape. You can add sugar to sweeten. It can have rectified concentrated grape must. It can have concentrated grape must. It can have sucrose, and you can add grape must to it to add sweetness. Normally, fermentation is stopped with a neutral alcohol, but it can also have a fruit brandy stopping it. So, for example, when we look at Balthazar, they use actually a grape brandy and an eau de vie brandy. But yeah, 96% ABV spirit is used, and that is sometimes used to macerate. Some companies like Noilly Prat actually macerate within wine, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. It's harder to extract flavor using wine because of the lower alcohol. It takes longer and it's a much gentler extraction, whereas using alcohol is going to give you more. So, you know, you have this, as I said, it has to contain Artemisia or the family of wormwood, and then you can have loads of different botanicals, which we'll sort of talk through as we go along. So I feel we should probably have a little drink. Yes, in the US, wormwood was not required. I don't know if legally now it is. The US, of course, as we know, has some rogue rules when it comes to alcohol production and wine production. Sorry, Becky Sue. So I will have changed the order of what we're tasting, because in true Dawn style, I like to go rogue. And what I normally do is, I think I know what I'm going to do, and then I taste on the day, and then I feel some things, as you know, on the day, things often taste a little bit different. So I would love it if you could start with the Via. That is the Whisper Dry vermouth from Quadi. And so there's different styles of vermouths. You have extra dry. Oh, sorry, I should also say vermouth has to be between 14.5% ABV and 22% ABV by law. And then different styles that you have will have different ABVs and sugar levels. So the two sort of beginning categories are your dry style vermouths. Your extra dry can only have a maximum of 30 grams per liter residual sugar and has to have a minimum of 15% ABV. Dry style, which is what we have here, can have up to 50 grams per liter residual sugar and a minimum alcohol of 16%. So I, in my head, thought, okay, let's start with the Quinty from France, but actually I tasted the Via today, and it does feel drier. So when we say 30 grams per liter or 50 grams per liter, it's up to the producer what they put in, as long as they put no more than those levels, as in many sort of wines that we know today. So the one thing that I said to you before was that I really feel that the more winemakers that start making vermouth, the higher the quality of the vermouth we're going to get. Because I think in the past, when I think about the old days of tasting martini, and I just felt that grape, the quality of the wine wasn't good. And that's maybe why none of us really liked vermouth back in the past, because we just knew as wine people that there was just something fundamentally bad about the grapes they were using. And today, the more vermouths I take, and I deliberately put a martini in here today, because I really think what has massively changed about vermouth, full stop, is the quality of the grapes going into the actual wines. And as you know, you cannot make good wine without good grapes. So why the hell would you be able to make good spirit or good aromatized wine without using good grapes? And I think that, for me, is the biggest step change that I've seen in vermouth in the 20 years that I've been tasting. So let's pick up so this is from Quadi. Quadi, of course, in California, actually quite well known for their sweet wines. Of course, you all know them, I'm sure, and some of their fortified styles. And lovely. I've been trying to get the technical notes from all of these producers here, so I knew exactly what the grape varieties they're using. I knew they weren't going to tell me their secret botanical mix and the sugar levels, but it was like pulling teeth, like many things, as you all know. As journalists, I'm sure you know more than me that half the time they're a nightmare. So, and I think the other kind of big thing that's changed is that people are paying much more attention to the botanicals they're putting in. They're using much better botanicals. The world has opened up. I think it's really interesting how they macerate the botanicals is changing. So it's quite interesting when you're macerating your botanicals. As I said, you can either macerate in the wine, which will give you quite a delicate extraction. It won't give you big flavors. That's what Dolan does, and that's what Noilly Prat does. But most will actually macerate using alcohol, because that will pull out much more. Some do it in individual botanicals, will macerate by themselves, and then they'll blend them together. Some will actually sort of take batches. So they might say, okay, I've got cinchona bark, I've got cinnamon bark, I've got cassia. I'm going to put those because they are like flavors, and I'm going to macerate them together and then blend. Because if it's logical. If you think about, say, floral botanicals, say lavender, rose, chamomile, those kind of botanicals, those florals, they're going to need a much lighter, more delicate touch than a woody botanical, where you're going to have to pull more out from extraction. So, people sometimes group, people like Sacred in the UK are starting to use things we call rotovap distillation, which is a really low pressure distillation. So your boiling point is much, much lower than a classic pot still, or column still, which gives you much more gentle extraction. So you can really kind of tailor it to the delicate botanicals that you have in there, which I do think again is enhancing the quality of what you're kind of being able to do. So let's have a little taste of Via. So Via, their base is orange muscat on this. And I really like this one. So they do 4 different styles of vermouth. They do the whispering dry, they do an extra dry. These are the 2 that they say are their kind of, their martini vermouths. So they're white vermouths, they're drier in style, their botanicals are more herbaceous than they are if you were, say, using a Rosso or a kind of a darker style vermouth, an amber vermouth. And, you know, I'm not going to go through how this tastes. You're more than capable, probably more capable than me, of doing a description on flavor. But what I love about this is there's a vivacity to it, there's a brightness to it, and I think you can smell these. This is decent, great varietal. This is on the palate. You know, that lovely of kind of freshness. I get lovely, some delicate kind of yellow florals. I get a slight citrus lift, and it's very dry on the finish. I couldn't find out what their residual, and I'd be interested to see what you guys think the residual sugar is on that. My feeling is it cannot be more than about 15 grams per liter. I don't know if anyone else feels that it might be higher, lower, but I just can't see it because it is just so kind of bone dry. And
Dawn,
yeah.
Hello, Dawn. It's great.
Hello,
It's great
darling.
to hear you. Just to say, I wasn't going to say anything about the sugar, but I was going to say it would be good to know, as you go through these, how you think people are using these. Are they just
absolutely? And I'm definitely going to talk about that as we go through and what to do with them, because I think actually that's often the case. Is that you're 100% right. People kind of see vermouth and they're like, "Oh, it's in a recipe. Okay, I've got a bottle. What am I going to do with it?" And you know, and I think absolutely. So you know, for me, the 2 that you're about to taste. So well, the Via, which you tasted, and then when we go on to the next one, which is the Quintini, which is the French one. They, for me, are, if you're going to sort of think of classic ways of drinking, for sure in a martini. And you know, when we look at the martini, we have those people that are like, I just want to wave the bottle across in the direction of France across my martini. What's the point? Just drink gin or vodka. Just chill your gin, drink it. A martini should taste of vermouth, and it should taste of a dry vermouth. You know, it should have that lovely freshness, because what vermouth does give in a martini is this lovely, slightly dry character. It gives that lovely bitterness, because whatever whatever vermouth you have, you are going to have that element of bitterness, which is definitely coming from that wormwood. And also a lot of the botanicals that you're using in vermouth is bitter. And I think this is another actually really good point around bitterness. If we look at kind of trends, you can map trends in spirits very, very easily. So, you know, when we grow up, we're drinking sweet things. We drink Coca-Cola, we drink orange juice. Then we decide that we need alcohol in our lives, some earlier than others. I was probably earlier. And you then start to add neutral alcohols, because you don't really like the taste of alcohol. So you add it to something sweet. So hence, when you start your journey, you're probably drinking things like vodka. Then as your palate changes, you know, you maybe start drinking more tea, you drink more coffee, you're eating more foods, you're getting a broader perspective of flavor. That's when you maybe start moving into things that have flavor in alcohol, like gin. Then, of course, you migrate into those brown spirits, like rum, like whiskey, and that's how we see those trends. And for me, that's why vermouth is definitely on the up and will continue to go on the up. Because that consumer who's been drinking gin and tonic will have a little bit of a bitterness, a hint for bitterness, or a need for bitterness. You know, we see that coffee culture that's so prominent in the UK right now. That's the consumer's palate getting used to bitter. Hence why I firmly believe that vermouth is going to be a really strong trend over the next few years, because our palates as general consumers, Joe Bloggs, is getting more acclimatized to bitterness. And I think especially in the UK with that gin trend, it was natural that people were going to follow on into vermouth. So the other way I love drinking vermouth, and I think is totally underused, is with tonic. Tonic or soda. Long, tall drink, ice. Soda now for me, because actually tonic I find too sweet nowadays, with the exception of some tonics that are a little bit lighter in style, but I genuinely actually don't drink tonic a lot anymore. I tend to now, as a sparkling for a long drink, add a soda. I actually also discovered this Fever Tree apricot and grape, which is absolutely delicious in a slightly richer vermouth, which we'll talk about as we go through. But so there's so many now soft drinks that you can play around with flavor on that are really, really interesting. So for me, as a long drink, white or Bianco vermouth, or dry style, extra dry style and tonic is just delicious in summer. Slice of lemon, slice of orange, you know, you can play around with it in the same way you can play around with gin. So you know how everyone's trendy and they put their juniper berries in their gin. I mean, I can't be arsed doing that. You know, I'm so happy just put a slice of something in. But you can do the same things with vermouth. Why not? You know, that's the fun. That's the beauty of it. So, you know, I think if you then pick up the, if you have a couple of glasses, I'm sure you do, the La Quintier, which is from France, and stick your nose into that. Yeah, I would love it if I could commission a drier style of tonic as well, Richard, trust me. I don't like short dated products though. That's the issue. If you pick up that, that French vermouth, so, you know, if we look at that Via, it's bone dry, it's crisp, it's fresh. You know, put that, Sarah Jane, put that in your classic risotto instead of sherry or white wine. It will pop. It's absolutely delicious. I do a saffron and white onion risotto, and I always have a bottle of vermouth or sherry that I just whack in instead of white wine, and it just gives so much amazing character to it. And you know, there's a whole host of different kind of cocktails that you can use, and I think that's the beauty. I'm not a cocktail bartender. I have to keep everything so simple, hence why I cannot wait to get into a bar. But you know, treat these dry white vermouths almost in the same way as you might treat a white wine. And you put some ice in it. Why not? Just drink it straight. They're so fresh. So if you pick up the next one and stick your nose in and go back to that Quadi, that Via, I mean, they're so different. You know, you look at that Quintini and it's so big and it's rich. And even though this is an extra dry style, and again, trying to find residual sugar on this was impossible, it has so much character. Now, the reason this one is so different, and you know, these French, just as a kind of overview on French vermouth styles, they tend to be much lighter, much drier styles than either the Spanish or the Italian, if you're looking at European vermouths. And they do tend to have this sort of quite sort of bright freshness. So here they're actually basing it on, and we'll talk a little bit more about the grapes that are going into French vermouths as we go, but here they're actually basing it on Pinot de Charente. Pinot de Charente, again, another favorite drink of mine, which I think not enough people drink, is based on the grape must, the juice coming from what would be made into cognac, and then it can be a little bit fermented, and then fermentation stopped by the addition of cognac, or it can be just the must with the addition of cognac, so no fermentation at all of the grape juice. And that's why, so this will be based on Uni Blanc Colombard, which are, again, Uni Blanc, as we all know, Trebbiano in Italy, which is also a classic Italian vermouth for making, Italian grape for making vermouth. In France, so when you're making sort of vermouth, unlike sort of a spirit that's distilled from grapes, so like Armagnac, Cognac, where you need fairly neutral grapes that kind of don't have much character, which have good acidity. In vermouth, actually, you can use different. So we saw that one was a Muscat, so a Moscato they use, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we come to the Italian ones. But also, so Noilly Prat will use Picpoul as a style, because the French actually like a cleaner style, whereas in Germany, Riesling, a lot of the kind of hybrid varietals, same in the UK. So here, It is definitely based on mainly Uni Blanc, the main grape that you find in cognac. And I believe there's a little bit of Colombard in this as well. But that kind of Pinot de Chiron, because you have that influence of that grape brandy, that cognac in there, you're getting much more intensity out of this vermouth than you would do on that Via. Yeah, on the palate, lovely citrus. Yeah, it's, you know, it's beautiful. It's got that rose petal. I actually believe they do put rose petal in this as one of the botanicals. They have quite a lot of floral botanicals that go into their vermouths. And I am going to cheat over here on my cheat sheet just in case I have written it down. They use 27 botanicals in this. So that's quite a lot of botanicals. All their vermouths have a base of 12 botanicals, and then this one actually has 27. So lot of bitter orange, cinchona bark, which gives you that lovely bitterness, as well as the wormwood. They actually, you know, have this sort of, they don't add, so you can add caramel as well to vermouth. So that Ambrato or that Cocky, sorry, not the Ambrato, but the Cocky will have a little bit of caramel. That's often where the color comes from in darker vermouths, is caramel. Not often do they use red grapes, except for things like Regal Rogue and Belsazar. They are using red grapes. A lot of the Italian ones won't use red grapes. They'll actually use white grapes and then put the caramel in to give you that color. The French one, they don't actually put any caramels. They don't use any oak for aging. It's a really sort of clean and pure style of vermouth. And it actually has iris root and angelica. So again, quite kind of drying botanicals. So orris root especially gives dryness in gin, angelica as well. So, you know, all of these were very traditional herbs and spices that were used for health benefits. So in my head, drinking vermouth must make me healthy. Drink responsibly, she says. So, I mean, I hope you see how different those two are. I mean, they're really just spectacularly, just totally different. And for me, actually, if you were looking at these two, if I wanted, as Richard said, a martini that just had maybe a little bit more character of the vermouth, I definitely use this. I think this would actually also stand up more to tonic than the last one. I think there's just a little bit more richness. My feeling is, and I can't be for sure, but this will have higher residual. My feeling is this is more towards the 30 of the extra dry than the Via, which I believe is probably less. Again, I was notoriously bad at judging sugar in my MW blind tasting, so don't trust me, trust yourselves. But yeah, I would say for me, this is probably more around 25 grams per liter, just because there feels to be a lot more kind of residual on that, even on the finish. So if we kind of progress to where vermouth is today, I think this is where I'm starting to really get excited about vermouth. And it's these brands like Regal Rogue, like Belsazar, which are the next two we'll look at. The next one we will absolutely look at is the Regal Rogue Rosé. And this is where I come back to this sort of quality of grapes. Mark from Regal Rogue, I was the first person to sell his vermouths in the UK. And I met both him and Max from Belsazar, because I was also the first person in the UK to sell Belsazar, both at Selfridges. I launched them both in the UK. And I remember the first time I tried Max's vermouths. And I loved what he was doing. He was making a really nice, affordable vermouth that was a better quality than, say, the bog standard vermouths you find in the supermarket, but still affordable, still dry. So Mark, as a general rule, in all his vermouths, puts much less sugar in than most of the other vermouths on the market. You know, he's really about kind of lowering sugar. But when I tried his first vermouth, I said to him, "Where are you getting your grapes from?" And he was like, "Hunter Valley." I was like, "Okay." I was like, "They're not very good grapes." And it just came out of my mouth. And like, I am one that I don't pull my punches. And the poor boy looked at me and just looked so sad. I said, "But I really like the whole concept, but your grapes are not good." And do you know what? I love that man. He went back and he sourced better grapes. And as I've known him through the last, I think probably I launched it 10 years ago now, Regal Rogue, if not longer. He's now going into all organic grapes. He gets his grapes from, oh, what's his name? It is Justin Jarrett, who's one of Australia's sort of organic producers up in the Murray-Darling. He will be 100% organic on all his botanicals and all of his grapes by the end of 2021, which I just think is fantastic. And I actually think Australia is one to watch with Vermouth for obvious reasons. You know, they have great source of grapes. They have loads of, and Mark actually sources, he has classic botanicals, but most of his botanicals will be indigenous botanicals, all sourced from indigenous people in a sustainable way. And he is one of only 4 vermouths, well, actually, maybe it's more than that now, who is producing a rosé vermouth. And he was probably with Belsazar the first 2 people to do it. And I think it was a genius idea. You know, you look at rosé wine today and how much rosé is selling. Why would you not appeal to that consumer? And if we have a little taste of this or a smell of this, you know, you definitely get that sort of note of rhubarb, this strawberries, but that lovely, again, that bitterness, almost like it almost smells to be a little quinine note. And this would sit in a dry, semi-dry style vermouth. So if we're looking at semi-dry vermouths, you're looking between 50 grams and 90 grams per litre residual sugar. There's no minimum ABV. Semi-sweet would be 90 to 130 grams per litre. So those are the kind of categories we're looking at now. And then if you go into sweet vermouths, you're 130 grams per litre plus. So, you know, here, he actually did tell me what his grams per litre was. And let me see if I can find where I've put it. I think he told me this was around 30 grams per litre, which is quite for a sort of semi-sweet rose. The rosé vermouths tend to sit in the semi-sweet, semi-dry style. So between that 50 and 90 grams per litre, sometimes a bit more. And for me, again, this is what, if you were going to have a bit of fun and make a martini that was rosé, you know, people love that stuff. Why not? You know, this is a really nice one, again, to put into sort of a long drink, into a highball. He kind of says, this is your kind of, you can use instead of your Aperol spritz. So add this into a white wine and top with soda in terms of instead of an Aperol. And I think that's something that's quite interesting at the moment. You know, we've seen the revolution of Aperol. I remember myself and Patrick Sandeman were the first 2 people to bring Aperol into the UK. And the only reason both of us brought Aperol into the UK was both of us loved Aperol spritz so much after visiting Vinitaly and sitting in Piazza Erbe just drinking spritz, which Patrick and I used to do on a regular basis. And, you know, and I think it's a really nice way of kind of taking, you know, Aperol so sweet. This, nowhere near. I mean, I think Aperol must be about 130 grapes. Yeah, it is grapey, and he is sourcing really good grapes. So he uses a bit of Sauvignon Blanc. I think he has a little bit of Semillon in this. He didn't quite tell me what his mix of grapes was. In his reds, he uses Barossa Shiraz, some Grenache. You know, he's really gone out there and he's tried to find good wine. And I'm so excited. So other vermouths coming out of Australia that I think are really, really interesting. Madini, they are actually the first people to try making a natural vermouth. So they don't, well, they try not to use any sulfurs and things like that. No extra additives, anything like that, no sugar, which is quite interesting in itself. It does mean that sometimes they're a little unstable. I was going to show you them, and then I was just a bit nervous about decanting into bottle because I have had some not quite fabulous bottles, but they are, when they're good, they're very, very good. Curse Cure, again, it's a bartender with a winemaker, and they're doing some really amazing stuff out in Australia as well. So, you know, this is where I think we're going to see more and more winemakers playing around with vermouth, because, you know, everyone wants to kind of capture that spirit consumer, because that spirit consumer has good disposable income. You know, they're willing to try things, and I do feel, you know, we are seeing, even with gin, I'm seeing winemakers make gin. I want to kill them all. Sorry, me and gin are not best friends, purely because I have about 20 new gins a week approaching me, which I can't love. I do think like these kind of new vermouths, and even though you have laws surrounding vermouth, there is so much you can do within it because those laws are not so strict, unless of course you're in Torino or if you're in Chambéry. So if we move on to the fourth one, if you take the Belsazar one, which is the summer Riesling edition. And as I said, you know, Max and Mark from Regal Rogue and Max from Belsazar, they were part of Diageo's sort of pilot, where they were the ones that kind of said, okay, who are the next kind of big producers? And now, of course, Diageo owns part of Belsazar. That was part of their agreement with how they kind of work on the scheme to kind of bring new producers through. And I remember trying Max's, when they presented to me, Max and his business partner, who are absolutely fabulous people, they showed me it and I was like, oh my God, sommeliers would love this. Because I was like, he's the first one that I thought I was like, I can taste the grape here. And normally he buys all his wines from Baden and around Baden region. So his red is Pinot Noir, Spätburgunder. His whites depend, some Pinot Blanc and things, but he actually partnered with Dr. Lucen on this one. And this was his absolutely, when I first tasted this, I remember just thinking I could drink liters of this, literally, and have done ever since. So they released it, they only did it as a one-off, but it was so popular that they decided to just keep releasing it every year. So this is the last summer's, which they released in like September. I was like, summer's gone, my friend. But that's just Diageo, that wasn't them. And you know, what they do here is they macerate it with pineapples. Actually, one of the notes in here is pineapple. And as I'm a rum fanatic, anything with pineapple is also very exciting to me in my mind. So on the nose on this, you know, you smell the grape. You know, Sarah Jane, you said Regal Rogue is remarkably grapey. Well, this one is really grapey. Yeah. And they work with a distillery which is very well known for producing very, very high quality fruit brandies. And what they do here is they actually, with their grape must, they actually stop the fermentation with a grape brandy, and which they age in barrel to then use when they're stopping the fermentation of the wine. And again, as I said, you know, you've got that lovely pineapple-y kind of note on the finish. Here, this is the one that I would partner with this Fever Tree apricot. Yeah. Absolutely. As a, you know, you can imagine sitting there, summer, on the terrace, in the park with our 6 friends that we're allowed to talk to. You've got a big jug of this with some ice and pineapple, you know, forget Pimm's. This is the new Pimm's. Who needs Pimm's? You know, this is it. This is just delicious. I could just drink this all day. And this is kind of when I talked to the boys here, I was like, you need to be talking to sommeliers with these because the quality of your grapes are good. And even the red is probably my least favorite from them, but even there, I think they've done a really, really good job there. You know, they're definitely starting to again source better Spätburgunder than they were in the very, very beginning. You know, and I think that's it. It's so exciting. You know, there's so much now that like where you can go with vermouth to do things like this. You know, macerating with pineapple. Who'd have thought? And like what I love about this is on the finish, I'm literally just tasting pineapple. Oh, no. You know what? I'd actually even play with this in a pina colada. I think bit of white rum, bit of this. Yeah, why not? Yeah, that's the great thing about cocktails. It's like cooking. You can just throw stuff together and see what happens. I love it. So if we move on to that one, because I'm conscious of time and I of course talk far too much. If you kind of look at the next one, which is the Martini Reserva Speciale Ambrata. And I picked this because I think we all have an idea of Martini in our heads. I had an idea of Martini in my head. And I remember when they approached me with this, I think they launched this one in, I want to say 2017. And I was like, send me a sample, I'll think about it. And they sent me a sample, and I remember tasting it, and I was like, my God, that's good. I was like, that's not martini. And they do an Ambrata, they do a Reserva, Rosso, and they're both absolutely delicious vermouths, you know. And Martini, one of the oldest families, so Martini were really the people that were responsible for getting martini or vermouth out into the big market. They were the ones that went to America and, you know, got the bartenders over there really talking about vermouth. You know, like you see those beautiful old posters from Martini. We have quite a lot of them in this building here. And, you know, they were the ones actually, because in the very, very beginning when vermouth was produced, it was only allowed to be sold within that sort of Italy and that Duchy of Savoy. And Martini were the ones that really went out and said, no, we want to sell to a wider, there's a market here. Let's capitalize on it. And, you know, Antonio Martini was the owner, the chairman, and Rossi, I can't remember his first name, was the winemaker, and hence Martini e Rossi. And this is Ambrato style. So again, this doesn't really have a specified sweetness level, but you're looking between that sort of semi-sweet and that dry style vermouth. So you're looking between that 90 to 130 grams per litre residual. Often the color, then you see some Ambratos can be a bit darker, that will be caramel coloring. This one, they were unspecified about the grapes, so I feel they're probably using Trebbiano, but they do have a little Moscato d'Asti in there. So if you're a Vermouth de Torino, and the Vermouth de Torino, there's a consorzio, like we've seen a very similar action as the Prosecco Consorzio, that they really kind of banded together, the producers, to really get an AOP for this, because they wanted to protect that name, Vermouth de Torino. And Roberto Bava, the guys at Martini were very much, and a lot of the sort of producers around Torino really kind of wanted to protect that name and banded together to kind of get that protection. So if it is from Torino, all the grapes have to be sourced from the region. They have to use the two wormwoods, which are the Roman wormwood and the Grand wormwood. And there's other laws around kind of ABV and things like that. They're quite sort of rigid. They are probably the most rigid of the kind of the AOCs for sort of that kind of spirits. They really are kind of a lot more specific about what they do. And actually I was here, an amber can have a maximum level of alcohol of 22%. So it can't go over that, but most of them, I think this one is 18. Yeah, most of them sit around 18. So this one is around a semi-sweet level, of course, because it's Martini. Could I find out anything about it? No, not at all. I got a tasting note from the brand ambassador. I was like, thank you very much. I could have done that myself. But they do actually, the Moscato, they do age, or they macerate, they kind of age their macerated botanicals in what they call a Tino, which is, couldn't find the size, but it's an old barrel, kind of tonneau kind of size, I would presume by the look of the image, but it didn't tell me exactly how big it was. And they actually rest their vermouths, their maceration for quite some time. Actually, I'll give Martini that. They have quite a gentle style maceration on their botanicals. This has Roman chamomile in it. It has cinchona. It has Chinese rhubarb. And I think for me, this is where, if I look at the Italian style vermouths, whether they're the Biancos or the Rossos, they definitely tend to be richer on the palate, but they still have this vein of dryness and that vein of acidity that if we think of Italian wines, we still get. Now, I'm sure Sarah Jane's going to ask me about Spanish vermouth, and I didn't pick a Spanish vermouth, actually because I'm not a massive fan of a lot of Spanish vermouths at the moment. I find them slightly flat on the palate. But I actually did taste some the other day, which I thought were really, really good. Don't ask me their names because I now can't remember. I'm trying to set them up as products at the moment. But a lot of the Spanish vermouths are based on either sort of Palomino, a lot of the Xarello and Paraleda and the Cava grapes. Also Tempranillo for the Rosses. So, you know, really, really interesting. Yeah, La Pivon is actually a decent style from them. I mean, Lustau we see quite a lot now. They also have a Rosato. I do just find them just a little bit fat for me. I prefer that Italian style just because of that vein of acidity that I just love, love, love when I have Italian wine. Again, for me, this is again a little bit more, you want kind of heavier cocktail in here. For me, if you were going to make a Negroni with a white vermouth, this would be the style of vermouth I would use. Like so much concentration, so much, so that lovely bitterness coming through. No, thank you, Sarah Jane. Sorry, I'm overrunning as always. But let's move on to the last one since I am conscious of time. So this again is another Vermouth de Torino, and I had to bring Cocchi di Torino in here because for me, if you love Negronis, there are two vermouths, Rosso vermouths to use in Negroni. If you want to do a recipe of a third gin, a third Campari, and a third a Rosso vermouth, this is the only vermouth to use. This is, for me, one of the best Negroni vermouths, or even old-fashioned, Manhattan. And this, you know, he macerates both in his botanicals and spirits and in wine. He uses Moscato. Actually, Roberto's family were traditionally winemakers, Barolo makers, Barbaresco makers. But actually, I do think that don't tell Roberto this. I think their vermouth's a lot better than their wine. But I do think that that heritage of being winemaker first is really something instead. And I want to say that this Vermouth de Torino was launched. So it was a company that was an old company, and then Roberto Bava has brought it back to life, same with the Chatelet, which is his drier style vermouths, more sort of French vermouth styles. And this has just so much. They source all their Artemisa, their wormwood from Piemonte. Again, as I said, Moscato is the base wine on this. This he didn't want to tell me, but I forced to add to him, has 200 grams per liter residual sugar in it. Oh, I love it. That bitterness, that richness. Just for me, it has this little lick of vanilla. It's got that kind of slightly rhubarb, kind of bitter orange. Nothing better to make a Manhattan or a Negroni with. Another one I love to use in a Negroni, but you'll have to upweight the gin and the Campari, would be, of course, the brain, very famous Antica Formula. But Antica Formula is very, very, very intense as a vermouth. It's almost like tar. It's like, and you just need to downweight that as a vermouth in terms of proportion, because it's just going to overpower if you do a third. So, you know, I think kind of I wanted to show you 6 very, very different styles of vermouth, and you know, we haven't even touched on English vermouth. There's some amazing vermouths in England right now. Londinio, the guys at Asterley, a lot of the English winemakers now doing vermouths. Gusbourne occasionally release their one from Pinot Noir. You know, this is the brave new world, and it's a world I'm hugely excited about. And you know, I'm still learning about vermouth. I get confused all the time. What's vermouth? What's not vermouth? But when you pick these such different styles, such good quality wine in these, you know, this is not bad quality. There's no oxidation. Boulevardier, this little beauty. You know, there's such fabulous product out there, and that's why I wanted to do this talk. And when I said to Abigail, you know, I'd love to do something with wine writers around vermouth, and you know, we saw Jancis and her crew have been writing a lot about vermouth recently. Actually, that's what kind of sort of spurred me into do it, because they all contacted me to ask me about kind of what vermouths I thought were interesting out there at the moment. And I see, you know, new vermouths every day. It's hugely exciting. Italy's on fire with different vermouths right now. They're bringing back old recipes. Scarpa is one of the ones that's kind of being brought back to life. Australia, as I said before, Germany, you've got Belsazar, you've got Ferdinand, which bases all their vermouths on Riesling. so many different countries, and I can't imagine it stopping, and it's hugely exciting. So if you do have any questions, please ask. I'll try and answer, but thank you so much for bearing with my rambling, because I do ramble. I do apologize. But yeah, please, if you have any questions, and definitely go see Roberto Bava. If you want me to talk to Roberto and organize a trip for you guys, I'm sure he'd love to. So just give me a holler.
Dawn, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much. We're a little over, but if you've got any questions, I think at this point, why not just unmute yourself, wave, and ask a question rather than having to type it all out. Isn't it? Yeah, Amanda.
I have a quick question about glassware for drinking vermouth.
Yes.
Straight. So obviously not cocktails, but what glassware would you recommend if you want to just taste by itself, chilled with ice?
I mean, I'm a massive fan of things like ISO glasses for things like that, or even just a classic Riesling glass, because you don't want it. It's a wine first and foremost. So, you know, if you have something that again has that concentration, if you want to put ice in it, you could drink it out of a tumbler. There's no problem. I drink out of these all the time. These are perfect measures. This is what I taste all my spirits in. You know, but yeah, definitely use a wine glass or an ISO, just straight.
Great tasting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there was fantastic range there. I loved the range that you showed. I know Kochi one very well, but I liked some of these others, like the Regal Rose. That was really delightful. To me, it's very minty actually in character, but very gently integrated bitterness. So thank you. It's a really lovely range.
No, my pleasure, Susan. You know, and try some of his other vermouths because they're equally delicious. His Daring Dry is lovely. You know, I think he's a really talented producer, and I love what he's doing in terms of organics, because I think, and he'll tell you everything about what goes on in his vermouth. And I think traceability and that kind of aspect of knowing what's going on, you know, we're going to be challenged more and more on as buyers, because the consumer wants to know.
Can you buy all of these in the UK then? They've all got our prices, yeah?
www.thewhiskeyexchange.com.
Okay.
And we have many more. Yes, absolutely. I think they're all on. I don't know if I did a tasting sheet, so all of the vermouths and the pricing. I put my pricing, the Whiskey Exchange pricing.
Okay.
On.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions?
Hopefully everybody got the tasting sheet. I emailed it over yesterday. So if anybody hasn't got it, then just let me know and I can forward it over to you again. No problem.
Great.
Hi, Dawn. Just a quick question. Really great tasting as ever. Thank you. I'm just wondering, because I know you've done a lot of work on categorization around rum, and it was interesting hearing you talking about the evolution and, you know, could this sort of, you know, be a growing category over the sort of coming years? And I'm just wondering what's the sort of state of play with categorization in terms of like how well, you know, are retailers or producers doing at letting people know what the liquid inside the bottle is going to taste like and potentially its uses before they sort of shell out their cash?
Oh, they're terrible. And, you know, like anything. So at the moment, in theory, if I can ever get some time to do it, vermouth probably I'm not going to categorize just yet, just because I think it's a little bit more obvious in terms of if you like a Bianco or whatever. My next big project will be tequila and mezcal for categorization, which is going to be a big one. So I believe, so Lawrence knows me very well from the spirit side of things, and I believe very much about guiding consumers around taste and taste profile. So with rum, we categorize in two means. We did based on production, which is kind of more complex, but then we based around flavors. So I created 6 flavor camps that I believed you could fit most rums into. I believe I'll do something similar for tequila mezcal, but you could equally do it for things like vermouth and stuff like that.
Great. One more question, if there is one out there, perhaps. Okay, fantastic. Dawn, thank you so much for doing this. It's absolutely fascinating. And I think that just to, I don't know, start to understand the variation out there, just even within dry vermouth is stunning. So yes, thank you very much. And I hope that we can perhaps persuade you to come back and do other tastings with us.
Absolutely, I'd love to. I'm all for bringing the wine world kicking and screaming into the spirit world and vice versa.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everybody else for coming and listening to Dawn talk about Vermouth. Cheerio.